Ancient Lights by Algernon Blackwood. From Southwater, where he left the train, the road led due west, that he knew. For the rest he trusted to luck, being one of those born walkers who dislike asking the way. He had that instinct, and as a rule it served him well. A mile or so due west along the sandy road, till you come to a stile on the right. Then across the fields you'll see the red house straight before you. He glanced at the postcard's instructions once again, and once again he tried to decipher the scratched-out sentence. Without success, it had been so elaborately linked over that no word was legible. Inked-out sentences in a letter were always enticing. He wondered what it was that had to be so very carefully obliterated. The afternoon was boisterous, with a tearing, shouting wind that blew from the sea. Across the Sussex swelled massive clouds with rounded piled-up edges, cannoned across gaping spaces of blue sky. Far away the line of downs swept the horizon like an arriving wave. Chanctonbury Ring rode that crest, a scudding ship, hull down before the wind. He took his hat off and walked rapidly, breathing great draughts of air with delight and exhilaration. The road was deserted, no horsemen, bicycles, or motors, not even a tradesman's cart. No single walker, but anyhow, he would never have asked the way, keeping a sharp eye for the still. He pounded along while the wind tossed his cloak against his face and made waves across the blue puddles in the yellow road. The trees showed their under leaves of white. The bracken and high new grass bent all one way. Great life was in the day, high spirits and dancing everywhere. And for a Croydon surveyor's clerk, just out of an office this week was a holiday at the sea. It was a date for high adventure, and his heart rose up to meet the mood of nature. His umbrella with silver ring ought to have been a sword, and his brown shoes would have been top boots with spurs upon the heels, where hid the enchanted castle, and the princess with the hair of sunny gold. His horse, the Style, came suddenly into his view, and nipped adventure in the bud. Every day clothes took him prisoner again. He was a surveyor's clerk, middle-aged, earning £3 a week, coming from Croydon to see about a client's proposed alterations in a wood, something to ensure better view from the dining-room window. Across the fields, perhaps a mile away, he saw the red house gleaming in the sunshine, and resting on the stile that a moment to get his breath, he noticed the copse of oak and hornbeam on the right. He told himself, so that must be the wood he wants to get cut down to improve the view? I'll have a look. There were boards up, of course, but there was an inviting little path as well. I'm not a trespasser, he said. It's my part of business, this is. He scrambled awkwardly over the gate and entered the copse. A little round would bring him to the field again. But this moment he passed along the trees. The wind ceased shouting, and the stillness dropped upon the wood. So dense was the growth that the sunshine only came through in isolated patches. The air was close. He mopped his forehead, then put his green felt hat on. But a low branch knocked it off again at once, and as he stooped, an elastic twig swung back and hit his face. There were flowers along both edges of the little path. Glades opened on either side. Ferns curved about in damper corners, and the smell of earth and foliage was rich and sweet. It was cooler here. What an enchanting little wood, he thought, turning down as a small green glade where the sunshine flickered like silver wings. How it danced and fluttered and moved about. He put a dark blue flower in his buttonhole, again in his hat, caught by an oak branch as he rose, was knocked from his head, falling across his eyes. And this time he did not put it on again. Swinging his umbrella, he walked on with an uncovered head, whistling rather loudly as he went. But the thickness of the trees hardly encouraged whistling, and something of his gaiety and high spirits seemed to leave him. He suddenly found himself treading circumspectly and with caution. The stillness in the woods was so peculiar. There was a rustle among the ferns and leaves, and something shot across the path, 10 yards ahead, stopped abruptly with an instant, with his head cocked sideways to stare, then dived again beneath the underbrush with the speed of a shadow. He started like a frightened child, laughing. The next second a mere peasant could have made him jump. In the distance he heard wheels upon the road, and wondered why the sound was so pleasant. Good old butcher's cart, he said to himself. Then he realized he was going in the wrong direction, and somehow got turned round, for the road should be behind him, not in front. And he hurriedly took another narrow glade that lost itself in greenness to light. That's my direction, of course, he said. The trees have mixed me up a bit, it seems. Then found himself abruptly by the gate he had first climbed over. He had merely made a circle. Surprise became almost discomfiture then, and a man, dressed like a gamekeeper in browny green, leaned against the gate, hitting his legs with a switch. "I'm making for Mr. Lumley's farm," explained the walker. "This is his wood, I believe." Then stopped dead because it was no man at all, but merely the effect of light, shade, and foliage. He stepped back to reconstruct the singular illusion, but the wind shook the branches roughly here on the edge of the wood, and foliage. He stepped back to reconstruct the singular illusion, but the wind, leaves all rustled strangely, and just then the sun went behind a cloud, making the whole wood look otherwise. Yet his mind could only be thus doubly deceived, was indeed remarkable, for it almost seemed to him that the man had answered, spoken, or was this the shuffling noise the branches made, and had pointed with his switch to the notice board upon the nearest tree. The words rang on in his head, but of course he had imagined them. No, it's not his wood, it's ours. And some village wit, moreover, had changed the lettering on the weather-beaten board, for it quite read plainly, "Trespassers will be persecuted." And while the astonished clerk read the words and chuckled. He said to himself, thinking what a tale he'd have to tell his wife and children later. The blooming wood had tried to chuck him out, but he'll go it again. Why, it's only a matter of square acre at most. I'm bound to reach the fields of the other side if I keep straight on. He remembered his position in the office. He had certain dignity to maintain. The cloud passed from below the sun, and light splashed suddenly in all manner of unlikely places. The man went straight on. He felt a touch of puzzling confusion somewhere. This way the cusp had shifting from sunshine into shadow doubtless troubled sight a little. To his relief at last, a new glade opened through the trees and disclosed the fields, with a glimpse of a red house in the distance at the far end. But a little wicket gate that stood across the path had first to be climbed, and as he scrambled heavily over, for it would not open, he got the astonishing feeling that it slid off sideways beneath his weight and towards the wood, like a moving staircase at Harrod's and Earl's court. Sideways beneath his weight, toward the wood. It began to glide off with him. It was quite horrible. He made a violent effort to get down before it carried him into the trees, but his feet became entangled with the bars and umbrella, so that he fell heavily upon the farther side, arms spread across the grass and nettles, boots clutched between the first and second bars. He lay there a moment like a man crucified upside down, and while he struggled to get disentangled, feet, bars, and umbrella formed a regular net. He saw a little man in browny green go past him with extreme rapidity through the wood. The man was laughing. He passed across the glade some 50 yards away, and he was not alone this time. A companion like himself went with him. The clerk, now upon his feet again, watched them disappear into the room of the green beyond. "The tramps, not gatekeepers," he said to himself, half mortified, half angry. But his heart was thumping dreadfully, and he dared not utter his thought. He examined the wicket gate, convinced it was a trick gate somehow, then went hurriedly on again, disturbed beyond belief to see that the glade was no longer opened into fields, but curved away to the right. What in the world had happened to him? His sight was so utterly at fault. Again the sun flamed out abruptly and lit the door of the wood, clattering everywhere upon the leaves, making a sharp pattering as of many footsteps. The whole cusp shuddered and went moving. Rain, by George, thought the clerk, and feeling for his umbrella, discovered he had lost it. He had turned to the gate and found it lying on the farther side. To his amazement, he saw the fields at the far end of the glade, the red house, too, ashine in the sunset. He laughed then, for of course, in his struggle with the gate he had somehow got turned round and fallen back instead of forwards. Climbing over this time easily, he retraced his steps. The silver band, he saw, had been torn from the umbrella. No doubt his foot, a nail, or something had caught it and ripped off. The clerk began to run. He felt extraordinarily dismayed. But while he ran, the entire wood ran with him, round him, and to and fro, trees shifting like living things. leaves folding and unfolding, trunks darting backwards and forwards, and branches disclosing enormous empty spaces, then closing up again before he could look into them. There were footsteps everywhere, and laughing, crying voices, and crowds of figures gathering just behind his back till the glade, he knew, was thick with moving life. The wind in his ears, and of course, produced the voices and the laughter, while sun and clouds plunging the cusp, alternatively in shadow and bright dazzling light, created the figures. But he did not like it, and went as fast as his sturdy legs could take him. He was frightened now. This was no story for his wife and children. He ran like the wind, but his feet made no sound upon the soft mossy turf. Then, to his horror, he saw that the glade grew narrow. Nettles and weeds stood thick across it. It dwindled down to a tiny path, and 20 yards ahead it stopped finally and melted off among the trees. What the trick gate had failed to achieve, this twisting glade accomplished easily, carried him in a bodily among the dense and crowding trees. There was only one thing to do: turn sharply and dash back again, run headlong into the life that followed at his back, followed so closely that now it almost touched him, pushing him in. And with reckless courage, this is what he did. Seemed like a fearful thing to do. He turned back with a violent spring, head down and shoulders forward, hands stretched before his face. He made the plunge like a hunted creature. He charged full tilt the other way, meeting the wind now in his face. Good Lord! The glade behind him had closed up as well. There was no longer any path at all. Turning round and round like an animal at bay, he searched for an opening, a way of escape, searched frantically, breathlessly, terrified now in his bones. But foliage surrounded him, branches blocked the way. The trees stood close and still, unshaken by a breath of wind. And the sun dipped that moment behind a great black cloud. The entire wood turned dark and silent. It watched him. Perhaps it was his final touch of sun blackness that made him act so foolishly, as though he really had lost his head. At any rate, without pausing to think, he dashed headlong among the trees again. There was a sensation of being stiflingly surrounded and entangled, and that he must break out at any cost. Out and away into the open of the blessed fields and air. He did this ill-considered thing, and apparently charged straight into an oak that deliberately moved into his path to stop him. He saw it shift across a good full yard, and being a measuring man accustomed to the theodolite and chain, he ought to know. He fell, saw stars, and felt 1,000 tiny fingers tugging and pulling at his hands, and neck and ankles. The stinging nettles, no doubt, were responsible for this. The thought of it later, at the moment, it felt diabolically calculated. But another remarkable illusion was not so easily explained, for all in a moment, it seemed, the entire wood went sliding past him, with a thick, deep rustling of leaves and laughter, myriad footsteps, and tiny little active, energetic shapes. 2 men in brown and green gave him a mighty hoist, and he opened his eyes to find himself lying in the meadow, beside the stile where a first incredible adventure had begun. The wood stood in its usual place and stared down upon him in the sunlight. There was the red house in the distance as before. Above him grinned the weather-beaten notice board. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Disheveled in mind and body, and a good deal shaken in his official soul, the clerk walked slowly across the fields. But on the way he glanced once more at the postcard of instructions, and saw with dull amazement that the inked-out sentence was quite legible, after all, beneath the scratches made across it. There is a short-cut through the wood. The wood I won't cut down, if you care to take it. Only care was so badly written, it looked more like another word. C was uncommonly like D. That's the cusp that spoils my view of the downs, you see, his client explained to him later, pointing across the fields and referring to the ordnance map beside him. I want to cut down on a path made so and so. His finger indicated a direction on the map. The fairy wood it's still called, and it's far older than this house. Come now, if you're ready, Mr. Thomas. We might go out and have a look at it. Well, that was the story. That was the quite interesting story of Ancient Lights by Algernon Blackwood.